What's up YouTube, I'm Guy, and today on the channel we are going to be talking about Rolex and whether or not it's worth the money. Now, a little bit of context. I did a side-by-side comparison just a couple of days ago, comparing my relatively new, modern ceramic Submariner with a replica Submariner that was loaned to me by a viewer. In that video, I got a ton of questions and a ton of comments, and while I addressed all of them individually, I thought it would be a good idea to take some of the most routinely asked questions and comments and discuss them here in a new video. Probably the most common comment that was placed on that video was, if somebody can produce a nearly one-to-one replica of a Rolex Submariner for about $500, why the heck does a authentic Rolex cost $8,500? Or more appropriately, Rolex is crazy overpriced is kind of what a lot of people were saying in that video. I want to address that and give my opinions on it, but there's a few other things that people mentioned repeatedly that I thought I should probably talk about first, briefly, and then we'll get to that value discussion a little bit here in a minute. One of the first things in that video that people brought up a number of times was that in my comparison of the authentic and the replica watch, I talked about the rehaut engraving, and it was pointed out to me that while I said the engraving on the replica was incorrect because of the style, that wasn't entirely true. Now, actually, I sort of knew this and I forgot to word it correctly, or I forgot to mention it because it slipped my mind. The truth is that the engraving on the rehaut of the replica watch that we had in that video would have been correct for a certain time period, but I was comparing it to a brand new watch. So it's important that you understand what watch you're buying if you're trying to identify whether or not it's real. If you are being told that it's a relatively new production watch, you need to know what is the correct style of engraving for that watch's rehaut. Similarly, I talked about in another video, we discussed myths and misinformation when it comes to identifying or spotting a fake Rolex. Things that are commonly told to the general public is that you can tell if a Rolex is faked based on what is printed on the dial, more specifically how the dial printing looks. For example, the font spacing of the word 300 meter in the depth rating portion of the dial. That also gets changed all the time, and like we discussed in that how to spot a fake video, that's not a good identifier. You need to know what it was correct for the time period of the watch that you're purchasing. If you believe that your watch was made in around 2015, you might have to do a little research to find out what was correct for that time period. The same goes with the rehaut engraving and how I misspoke when I described that as being incorrect. It would be incorrect for a modern Rolex produced today, but if you were under the impression that you were purchasing a Rolex made in 2012, roughly, it probably would have been correct. So I guess I'm a little bit guilty of perpetuating some of the myths and misinformation that I was sort of talking out against in the video prior. I apologize for that, but I did want to clarify that yes, it is technically correct depending on the time period of the watch's production. Something else that came up in the comments of that video comparing the replica to the real Rolex was questions about the movement. A lot of people said, why didn't you open it up? Why can't we see the movement? The truth of the matter is it's not my watch, and I didn't want to open it up and risk damaging it. Whether or not it's a replica, it still has a dollar value attached to it, and I didn't want to risk damaging something that didn't belong to me. Secondarily, I'm not going to open my watch to set them side by side. I'm not going to risk the water resistance rating or potentially damaging the movement of my authentic watch, so I saw no real point in opening them up and looking at the movement side by side. It did use a super clone 3135 movement in that replica watch, and frankly, if you wanted to look at pictures of a authentic 3135 movement with one of those clone movements, there's plenty of pictures online. You can look those up and find them yourselves. I didn't see a lot of value in doing it in my side-by-side comparison video. Here's the one that I thought was the funniest. People made the comment that I'm telling the fake manufacturers what they need to fix by comparing it so closely on camera, on YouTube. I really really doubt that that's the case. I'm pretty sure the people that are building these watches know what they are not doing right. They understand what their limitations are, and they're doing the best that they can to create these fake watches, unfortunately. I don't think that I'm telling them anything that they don't already know. So now the meat of the discussion that I wanted to talk about. Is a Rolex Submariner, date in my case, really worth $8,500 if all of these clones or replicas or fakes exist that are so incredibly close? Well, that's kind of a difficult question to answer, but I'll give you my opinions and tell you what I think about that. There's a ton of napkin math that you can find online to try to figure out how much does it cost Rolex to build a watch, in this case a Submariner. Nobody knows the answer to that, but let's kind of take some of this napkin math as mildly accurate. Most people seem to think that it costs them somewhere around $500 in materials, maybe upwards of around $1,000 to produce a single watch. If that's the case, that means that they're making what, $7,500 on every watch that they sell? That does seem ludicrous to a lot of people. Well, certainly that's not true, because the dealer's margin on most Rolex watches is around 40%. We know that. So in reality, Rolex is probably selling them for around $5,000. And we don't really know if there's other steps in the distribution chain, but let's just assume it costs them $1,000 to make, because we know it doesn't cost $100, and it's probably somewhere in that factor of 10 range. And let's assume that they're selling them to the dealers for around $5,000. Is it absurd to think that that's a reasonable price? Is it extremely overpriced? Is it not worth it? Well, here's my thoughts on that. Well, the bill of materials or the cost of production might be $1,000 or thereabouts. We don't know what else is going into the daily activities at Rolex. I mean, they employ hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. They have their own science divisions. They have foundries. They are employing gemologists for all of their diamonds and all of the precious stones that they put into their watches. They offer a 5-year warranty on their watches, and whether you like it or not, you're paying for that warranty. They spend a ton of money marketing the brand in order to create brand awareness, and in itself brings the value of the product up. So there's so much going on there that we can't simply say it cost them $1,000 to make it, so they should sell it for $2,000. They don't need to make 5 times their money on a watch. We don't know that they're making 5 times their money on a watch. And frankly, I don't think they are. When we factor in all of those other things that they have to do, you know, the distribution chain, the cost of insuring their business, taxes, all of the things that go in to running a giant corporation like that, they're probably making a lot less per watch is my guess. And again, these are all just guesses. Nobody really knows. So, you know, keep that in mind. On the other hand, we know that the people making these replicas aren't employing scientists, aren't employing engineers, aren't employing gemologists. They don't have a huge support staff that they need to pay for. I'm sure that the wages that they're paying the people that are assembling these products are somewhere close to slave labor. So yeah, they can afford to sell a watch for $500. Rolex cannot afford to sell their watches for $500. That said, is it overpriced? I don't begrudge them for selling an authentic Rolex watch for the prices they're asking. Again, the dealer's making something like 40% of the margin right off the top. The fact that Rolex is such a well-known brand that holds its value better than just about anything else you can buy that's not truly an investment, because watches aren't an investment, is impressive. Knowing that you can purchase a watch like a Submariner, wear it for 5 to 10 years, and basically your money's safe. You can resell it for potentially more than you paid for it, probably what you paid for it, and at worst case scenario, a little less than you paid for it, is important. And part of the cost of the watch is that retained value. you're paying for all of that marketing, all of that brand prestige. As a customer, that's part of where your money is going. It is securing the value of the item that you're purchasing, and that can't be discounted in my opinion. Another thing that you're paying for when you purchase a Rolex is quality control. And while I have discussed it in the past, Rolex does not have flawless quality control, despite what people will argue about until they're blue in the face. And I saw that on the comments of my previous video comparing the authentic Rolex with the fake. A lot of people had said Rolexes are always perfect, their quality control is infallible. That's not true. There are quality control problems with Rolexes from time to time. In both of the examples that I've owned, there were very slight quality control problems. I don't think that it's super common, nor do I think it's entirely uncommon though. Nevertheless, they do have some of the best quality control, and you're paying for that as well. So again, don't discount the little things that you're paying for when you spend the kind of money that you're looking to spend on one of these watches. In the end, there's two types of value in my mind. There's value for money. How good is the watch that you are buying vis-a-vis similar or competitive products on the market? And then there is retained value. That is, what will the watch be worth when you decide you want to sell it? In both cases, the value is very high on these watches. Is it very high on the value vis-a-vis the other competitive options on the market, especially when we're talking about something like this fake Rolex that is very close in terms of at least the visual quality? In looking at it, it's hard to discern a lot of differences. Yeah, it is still a lot better than that replica watch. The little things like the threading of the crown, the action of the bezel, the accuracy of the movement, everything is much better quality in the Rolex. It's just hard to notice in pictures. It's difficult to see at a glance, but when you really handle it and feel it, it does become apparent. So yes, the value vis-a-vis an inexpensive, relatively speaking, replica watch is there, and even compared to other competitive options on the market, it is still a pretty good value. In terms of the retained value, like we've already discussed, there's very few things that aren't actual investments that are better, so that, there's nothing really to argue there. So is it ridiculous, in my opinion, that Rolex sells a watch for $8,500 when other people are creating replicas for $500? I don't. You're getting so much more for your money. A lot of it is a little less tangible than you might see at first glance, but the value is there. Do I wish they were cheaper? Of course. Do I think they could be a little bit cheaper? I do think they could be a little bit cheaper, but we're never going to see a Rolex quality product for $500 or $1,000. I've said it in other videos, in particular when I reviewed and compared my Submariner to the Jeanalt Ocean Rover. There will be a time that somebody is creating a competitive option, I think for around $2,000 or $2,500, because that Ocean Rover by Jeanalt at $1,200 to $1,500 is pretty darn close. So yeah, again, I do expect to see very, very high quality watches in the future at that $2,000 to $2,500 price point. A brand like Oris that I've reviewed in the past is a good example also of a product that is getting very close. So yeah, I do wish Rolex was a little cheaper. I think it could be a little bit cheaper, but let's be realistic with our expectations. We're never going to get a watch of that quality for $500. Especially if we want it to have retained value and, for lack of a better word, be an investment. I don't want to use that phrase because you're not investing, but your money is relatively safe in the product. It's just not going to happen at $500. Alright guys, I wanted to address some of those questions, in particular that value question, but some of the other things that popped up in that previous video. I hope you appreciated and enjoyed this little follow-up video or response video, if you will. As always, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. If you'd like to help support the channel, there are a number of ways you can do that. They're all listed in the comments, or I'm sorry, the description below this video. You could always follow me on social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, that would always be appreciated, and thanks to you guys that are over there already supporting me. Finally, if you like any of the products that I've reviewed in the past and you'd like to purchase them, you can always find links to those products in the description through my Amazon affiliate account. That affords me a small commission, and I really do appreciate everyone that's been using those links. Alright guys, thanks again, and I'm going to say bye now.